أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيبنا وعزيزنا محمد، وعلى آله المجاهدين المتقين، وعلى أصحابه من الأنصار والمهاجرين، ومن اتبع نهجه إلى يوم الدين. Dear brothers, dear sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let me try to explain something at the beginning. We concentrated for well over a year on the history of Bani Israel, and then a few weeks ago there was the occasion of the 10th of Al-Muharram, a very important day in the Islamic calendar, and we opened up the issue of Karbala and Ashura, which obviously takes us into the area of what has become known as Sunnis and Shi'is, with all the misunderstandings and all of the indoctrination that has gone into these two groups of people throughout the centuries. I don't mean to part from the history of Bani Israel, and much of this actually depends on your feedback. If you would like to resume following the ups and downs and the zigzagging and wavering and stumbling of Bani Israel, we can certainly resume those ayat in the Quran that speak about Bani Israel. We probably are 1/4 to 1/3 through these ayat, and that took about almost a year and a half. So you can calculate that if we are going to press on with explaining Allah's precious ayat pertinent to what Bani Israel have been responsible for in the past and what they are responsible for today, and as they have not parted from their deviations, they are going to be responsible for much more in the coming years. So I will leave that to your feedback, but this session, and I'll maybe listen to what you have to say for a couple of weeks, or what we can do alternatively is 1 week we can speak about Bani Israel, and another week we can speak about this Sunni Shi'i cleavage in the Ummah. It doesn't really weigh on my conscience heavily one way or the other. Both of these are extremely important topics, because anyone who opens their eyes and looks around and sees what Bani Israel has done to we the Muslims and to the whole world, and what the Sunni Shi'i conflict has done to our own selves. Both of them are terrible, and both of them don't belong with everyone who is on as-sirat al-mustaqim. So this week we will carry on with speaking about this historical discourse of Sunnis not being able to distance themselves from the kings who ruled over the Muslims since Muawiyah, and Shi'is who are not able to appreciate what the Khulafa did preceding Al-Imam Ali. It's a type of black hole, if you will, that everyone sort of gets sucked into, and they lose their rational capacity. And then when they speak about these issues, they speak about them with some type of edgy nerves or wobbling minds. If this wasn't, as some I know from experience, that some viewers or listeners will say that, this is an issue that is best kept in the corner of silence. And the more we speak about it, the more we generate even more divisions. That is, I don't agree with that. I have to be speaking my heart and mind frankly and with transparency, that this issue has to be dealt with not with emotions. That's why this issue keeps on popping up. It gains a life of its own because it is fed by some Muslims. They get extremely emotional about this issue, or other Muslims that have just relegated the whole issue to oblivion, as if nothing, this doesn't exist, meaning the terrible deviation from qualified leaders who became kings and monarchs, i.e. disqualified leaders, even though they imposed themselves on the Muslim populations here and there throughout 14 centuries. The Sunnis, I don't like using these words, but I have to, just to explain in a as much as possible objective way what developed early on in our history, on what unfolded of events in the second and third generation and thereafter of our Islamic history. The Sunnis, there's a word that they use. The word is adalat as-sahaba, which means the fairness and the justice of as-sahaba. And the Shia speak about taharat ahl al-bayt. And they sort of use these descriptions to barricade themselves behind it. No one is questioning the first generation of committed Muslims, and no one is questioning the pureness of the Prophet's Ahl al-Bayt. But the way these two catchphrases are used, they are used in a clashing manner, as if to say, if you believe in the adala of the Sahaba, then you may marginalize the tahara of Ahl al-Bayt. Or vice versa, if you believe in the tahara of Ahl al-Bayt, you can marginalize the adala of Sahaba. This is how this emotional ball has been bouncing back and forth in our history. No one wants to, I mean, if they are, there are extremely few who want to arrest this bouncing motion or these bouncing emotions between two camps of Muslims. And hopefully, if we just give our thinking mind the freedom to reach the facts, we can arrest this destructive back and forth emotionally, and at certain junctures in history, what began as emotions climaxed with military clashes, wars among Muslims. Then we run into the difficulty of defining two words. The first word is Sahaba, and the second word is Ahl al-Bayt or Al Muhammad. We have definitions that are not grounded in the terminology and in the spirit of the Quran when it comes to these two words. I think I spoke about this somewhere, sometime in the past, but a refresher is due at this time. Not all the Muslims around the Prophet, beginning with Al-Madinah and spreading throughout, because the phenomenon of Islam was growing. So when the Prophet, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him, when he passed on to Allah Jalla Jalaluh, Islam was virtually throughout all of the Arabian Peninsula and further northward and eastward, and even though it's scantily, but southward. So not all of these Muslims are Sahaba. So there are Muslims who are munafiqeen. There are Muslims who are a'rab. There are Muslims who are al-mu'allafa qulubuhum. There's different categories or classifications of Muslims that cannot all be lumped together and saying these are Sahaba. And this is a major mistake that has to be visited by thinking Muslims. Obviously, those who say that they are Shi'is, even though many of them may want to help in this regard, but because they do an emotional hatchet job. Their intentions are good, not all of them, but those who want to help out. But when they approach this subject, they do so in a way that is harmful to those who are on the Sunni side, who want to get a grip on this issue. So it falls by and large upon those who are Sunnis to correct Sunnis. And I have to reiterate that I'm using the word Sunni because it is the word that is the easiest one to use without going into a lot of details and without shaving off or peeling off the multiple layers that exist within that context that is called Sunni. The same thing happens when Shi'is speak about Ahl al-Bayt. And among them, there is quite a few different types of interpretations as who are Ahl al-Bayt. Not in the first generation, because I think there's an agreement among Sunnis and Shi'is that the immediate family of Allah's Prophet is included in Al Muhammad. Because the word Ahl al-Bayt begins to blossom into the word Ahl al-Bayt and Al. Are they the same? I'm asking this question to try to stimulate your thought. The point that I want to make here is that Al, which the word Al in the Quran, our reference is the Quran. When we trace the word Al in the Quran, we find there's Al Ibrahim, and there's Al Yaqub, and there's Al Musa, etc. So what does this mean? Some definitions extend the meaning in a genealogical sense. I don't want to be very particular. I wasn't very particular in mentioning Sunnis at this point in this presentation. I don't want to be very particular in mentioning Shi'is neither. But one of the interpretations of Al Muhammad is a genetic interpretation. One of these offshoots of Shi'ism celebrates, I can't keep up with it, but at least it was like 10 or 15 years ago, they were honoring their 49th Imam. And that Imam, remember, I'm not using any nomenclatures. I don't want to get, I want to help out. We are in this together. I don't want to get on anyone's nerves. I don't want to insult anyone. I don't want to show disrespect for their convictions and beliefs. I just want us all together to put our minds together to untangle this sectarian knot. So this 49th Imam basically in part of his life appears to be a playboy. But nevertheless, this inability to understand what Al means in the history of Bani Israel, Banu Israel gave it all they have to define the word Al as family lineage. Some Muslims behave just like Bani Israel, and they define the word Al the same way. The best words in English that would capture most of the meaning of Al, as far as I can deliver it. I'm not the final word on this. I'm just trying to help out. Is kindred spirits. The kindred spirits of Ibrahim, the kindred spirits of Muhammad, and the kindred spirits of all of those prophetic endeavors and efforts to gel together a society. Those are the Als of Allah's prophets, in the plural. and they are the Al of Muhammad. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon him and his kindred spirits. So when we take a look at our own history, and now I will part from definitions and then take a hard look at our history. Ibn Kathir, a very well-known historian, in his book Al-Bidaya wa Al-Nihaya, he mentions that Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, one of the kings that came after Muawiyah and Yazid in the Umayyad dynasty, this Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, in today's language, signed an executive order forbidding anyone from mentioning the merits and the credibility and the distinctions of Umar ibn al-Khattab. I would like to know how this sits in the sectarian minds, both Sunnis and Shias. Because the problem with Sunnis is, I'm not speaking about all Sunnis. I'm just speaking about establishmentarian or status quo types of Sunnis. And those are not the majority of the Sunnis in the world. The problem with them is they think that the kings that came after Al-Imam Ali and Imam al-Hassan, the kings that came after them are khulafa. And you can pick up any type of book that you want, and 95% of them will designate or they will characterize the rulers after Al-Imam Ali and Al-Imam al-Hassan as khulafa. Sunnis will mature politically, ideologically, historically, educationally, and philosophically when they are able to say that the rulers of the Muslims, the majority of them, the rulers of the Muslims after Al-Imam Ali and Al-Imam al-Hassan were monarchs or kings. They can choose any word they want there, or synonymous words, but they were not khulafa of Rasulullah alayhi wa alihi salatu wassalam. The problem with the Shi'is is that if they have studied history very well, they take pleasure in calling the rulers after Al-Imam Ali and Al-Imam al-Hassan as khulafa, because they want the vices of monarchies to have a retroactive effect that will tarnish the three rulers that preceded Al-Imam Ali and Al-Imam al-Hassan. I hope I'm not, sort of putting it in a way that stimulates the emotions that will cause the mind to shut off. I'm trying to avoid that by any means. And that's the best way I could put it. So the Shi'is will mature, just like the Sunnis. They will mature when they call the rulers after Al-Imam Ali and Al-Imam al-Hassan, when they call them kings. When both Sunnis and Shi'is are able to do that, we have progressed immensely and brought and built a very significant bridge between these two historical deviations. And because of this concept of history, we sense, you can take those who have written, let's call them Shi'i books, and you will detect a suspicion in these books about the majority of the Muhajirin and the Ansar. This is where they have to correct themselves. The Sunnis, they, just like in the opposite direction, the Shi'is, they contract the grand effort of the Muhajirin and the Ansar along with Allah's Prophet. They contracted almost to nil. Opposite that, the Sunnis, they expand the Muhajirin and the Ansar and give the impression that all the rest of the Muslims are on par with al-Muhajirin and the Ansar. This area has to be thought through. We can't go on like this. It is not true. It is not factual. That middle ground has to be explored, discovered, and then after that to form a common platform for all of us who have been suffering from age-old sectarianism. I have to say, and I have to also smile it away, because I guess I'm a sort of an enigma, because you can't classify me strictly as a Shia or strictly as a Sunni. And I'm not trying to dodge the issues, and I'm not trying to be ambiguous. The only thing your brother here is trying to do is to shed light on these sensitive issues so that we can come together as Sunnis and as Shi'is. And I have to say in this regard, a Shi'i, generally speaking, a Shi'i is more honest with himself when he's not correct, but he's honest with himself or herself when they say that the Imams are faultless or impeccable. They come out, that's not accurate, but at least they're honest with themselves. This is the way they perceive of the Imams. They don't make mistakes. The Sunnis are not honest with themselves because they indirectly infer that those who they call as-Sahaba and Adalat as-Sahaba don't make mistakes. They don't say the Sahaba have isma to them, are impeccable, are faultless. They don't say that. But the way they present their history, they present it with the strong impression that those who are Sahaba cannot be held accountable for errors or deviations or outright acts of criminality. And that's another area that has to be worked on. A Sunni, let me demonstrate for you what I mean. A Sunni, even though they consider like Muawiyah and Yazid to be a Sahabi, which is not the case. I mentioned it before and I'll mention it again. Muawiyah was not a Sahabi in the conventional definition of who a Sahabi is. Muawiyah was a taliq. He was at war with the Sahaba of Rasulullah for 20 years plus. So how can he be a Sahabi? Just because he saw the Prophet, as some of these definitions have it? He was responsible for killing tens of thousands of people. He was responsible, him and his son, for sacking al-Medina, for dishonoring Muslim women, for killing children, for catapulting the Kaaba. And we say radiyallahu anhu. Some people say radiyallahu anhu. Anyways, I just began to scratch the surface, but it seems like my time is up. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to be with Him in this world and in the world to come. Wallahu yaqulu al-haq wa huwa yahdi as-sabil wa la tarkanu ila alladhina zalamu fatamassakum an-nar wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Wassalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.